So guys, we've got a number of attendees here. So welcome along everybody to our session on student wellbeing today. Let's face it, an incredibly important topic at any time, but even more so at the moment with many of our students still overseas and how we can look to connect with them, both those who are located domestically but overseas, and how we can indeed connect them together. So a very warm welcome to everybody. And especially to our two panelists for today. We've got Sean Tinker. Sean is from Swinburne University. Sean has a background in psychology, so it'll be really interesting, Sean, to hear your take on the student wellbeing and what you've put in place. And in particular, I think what's interesting is the way you have worked with students as partners around this whole area of supporting students, which I think is actually very, very interesting, and nothing like the student perspective on that as well. So welcome along, Sean, and I look forward to hearing from you very soon. And then we've got Tiffany from Monash. And Tiffany is well renowned for her innovation in education, loved by her students. We all know that. They speak very loudly about it, which is great. And so as well as innovation, Tiff has a great passion for gamification. Tiffany is also an elite athlete and one of Australia's top cyclists, so actually knows a lot about isolation. You can tell us a bit about that, Tiff. Resilience and perseverance, which I know was the angle that you came from in terms of building the content for your students at Monash. And I know you also teach, of course, at Copenhagen Business School, and your discipline is marketing, I will point out as well. So Sean, I might go back to you for a moment, and if you can give the panelists, but also the attendees here today, a bit of a background on your role at Swinburne and how you came, I guess, to use Quitch around that student wellbeing, because traditionally it was used, of course, for academic content. So very novel what both of you are doing. So Sean, I'll hand it over to you to do a bit of an introduction on your background, and then we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Gron. So I'll a little bit more to the background. I'm actually an organisational psychologist. That was my training in psychology, but with a focus on well-being, because my earlier degree was in health promotion, and that was incredibly valuable in helping me to see psychology in a way that was health promoting rather than trying to a medical model of trying to deal with ills. So I've always brought a health promotion attitude towards psychology. And organisational psychology to me is about how groups function at their best, and that isn't that far removed from how students operate and how a workplace operates. So it's about learning, it's about getting the best out of yourself, growing, development, and those sorts of things. So that's a really brief sort of background of what my values, I guess, that I bring to the work. Early this year, we were looking at ways that we could help students become more aware of the challenges, I guess, that transition creates for them in coming to higher education. And so we looked at Quitch as a vehicle in which we could communicate to students about some of the differences between, say, Year 12 and what happens at university. And so what we developed there in partnership with students were a handful of modules that were addressing that transition. So, expectations around university, having a positive mindset was in there. And we also looked at autonomy was another topic that we covered in that early stage. But it was more, at that stage pre-COVID, it was more about the practical things that would enable them to be doing face-to-face learning. So accessing some of the services and things like that. And working with students, was really important to me, because we've all got information, advice to give to students, but it's how they receive that advice, the method in which it's communicated to them, which can make the difference between them thinking that it's applicable to them or not. A lot of students will start university with a high level of optimism about how they'll go. So coming from a student is really important. It sort of breaks down some of those differences in perceptions. So we had our students develop it. I looked at this project as one that was a series of iterations, and the first semester, I think we had around a couple of hundred students get involved in first semester, but with COVID and lockdown, it soon became apparent that what students really needed was something different. And although we had a wellbeing approach to the modules we developed, we really did re-examine what we had and refocus so that we were emphasising their wellbeing in the transition to university, and particularly online studies. So in second semester, we added a few more modules around relatedness. Come to this semester, they've been refined further, and so the students developed one on making connections. So how do you make friends at university? It's often we say, well, connect with other students, but for a lot of students, that's a difficult task. So that they built a module around, ways that they could do that. And so we ended up with 6 modules this semester, and we've currently just under 900 students, commencing students, that have gone through this program. The feedback has just been brilliant. It's been mind-blowing. So it's been a great success. And I think one of the telling things about the success of the program is that students are not just doing the first module, they're doing successive modules, and in large numbers. So it's fantastic to see that. And, we'll find out whether it's helping them at the end of this semester when we have a look at their results, those that have been involved, and see if we've had that sort of impact.
Sean, I love this, that you've so you started off with a couple of modules and you've built them out based on the feedback from the students on what they're looking for. I love this idea of the connections, because you're right. We say make connections, make friends and so on, but how do people actually do that? So are these modules that you've added and so on, are they built by your students as partners initiative? Is that the way it's and then overseen by yourself and some of the others of the Swinburne team at student engagement? Or how does that part work?
Yeah, absolutely. They're led and built, designed, delivered by a team of 3 core students, but they've also engaged other students as topics for interviews. So the process is usually we looked for ready-made video content to use and found that there wasn't anything exactly what we needed. So, they've filmed videos. They've had other students edit those videos, put them together. And then we've had students write questions. Overseen, well, when I say overseen, it really is a partnership. I think my attitude is that we all bring, our own knowledge sets to solve problems and do things. And, so students have their perspective. It's a long time since I've been a student. So my experience doesn't really apply anymore. So they bring valuable insight into, sometimes the content, but more so about what would get students' attention. What's their needs? What are they really seeking at the time? So that we can address our material in that way to those students. So the students really are leading this process. My role has become less and less. I had a significant role early on, and as time has gone on, I've had one of my coordinators step in and play a more senior or central role in that. But even she is stepping back and letting them running. The competency of our students is just amazing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I love this story, and I love actually the fact that you talked about that you went out looking for content, because I would have thought the same. I would have thought there was some content available, but you didn't find what you wanted. So you actually went about getting the students to create their own. And then so the students have actually created videos as well that they load into Quitch, and these have been edited by other Swinburne students. Are they students who were in like the media area and so on? Or
that's right. We had Adobe coaches, students doing media and film and so forth, and so we, not having that content readily available could have been a barrier, but they just threw themselves everyone looked at each other and said, well, I haven't got skills in that area, and it was a matter of saying, well, where do we find it? Who can we talk to?
Well, that's fantastic. So it gives, it's a great story for students going out to look for employment as well, that they've actually done these projects in-house, isn't it?
Yes.
So there's a lot of great positives here.
And we even had to navigate the marketing department at the university to get them through. So.
That's always an interesting one, isn't it?
It is, but we were successful. So yeah.
Yeah, well done.
And now it's it's got such momentum that it's a real force. So I believe the quotes from the feedback that we're getting are being used on the Swinburne website at the moment.
That's wonderful, because that's quite a movement, over 900 students in a short period of time. So
it is to go from just under a couple of hundred this time last year, and
well done, Sean. Well, this is great, Sean. We're going to come back to you. We've got some more questions for you, and Tiff, we might jump over to you now. And so we know, Tiff, you're a marketing academic, as I mentioned before, but you were actually involved in Monash in building this student wellbeing module. And I believe you built it yourself from scratch with some other colleagues. So do you want to tell us your story and your experiences, Tiff, please?
Sure. So this was a project that we did at Monash College specifically. The reason being is the biggest difference between the college and the university is the college has 100% international students. So we were dealing with students that were that could have been in Melbourne or could not have been in Melbourne, but definitely were possibly living in Melbourne all by their own, stuck in an apartment. With English as possible second language, and all sorts of different perspectives looking at it. So it was a Monash College-based project that I was brought into originally to help out with doing some predictive modeling, and then ended up somehow running the app. So it was a very interesting transition from coming over as a marketing academic, doing modeling, and then moving into, So we had lots of fun on the project. But essentially we did a pilot project first. So we were looking at-risk students as our initial focus. So trying to look specifically at students that were at risk of discontinuing and how we could best support them. And I remember I was, flipping through my ginormous work diary, because I love the old handwritten stuff. It just makes my brain think differently. While Sean was talking, and I remember being in a meeting when they were talking about how do we design interventions for these at-risk students. And I'm doodling, and I've actually got this writing here going, how do we change their behavior? How do we do positive reinforcement? How do we produce habits? And I'm like, doodling away in the meeting. And then I'm like, I use Quitch all the time in my marketing subjects. Can we use that in this different platforms? That's kind of how we came about to be using Quitch specifically for student intervention, was this idea of how do we create positive habits and reinforce that to get students to develop positive habits while they're in lockdown, while they're in COVID situation. So that's kind of how the app came to be. We did a pilot project first. We didn't have a ton of students. I think we only had about 20 or 30 students involved in the first project. And then at the end of that, we got feedback from them. And I think it's a lot similar to what Sean was going through. We got feedback from the students. They went, the material that you've curated, because it was a lot of curated content, I just didn't have simple time to create at that point. I did a couple of videos while I was bored in the house and stuck at home, created a couple of videos. But again, I'm the same as Sean. It's been a long time since I was a student, so I'm not really the face that they want to see from a peer perspective. So I shot a lot of videos, curated a ton of content, worked with a whole raft of people from different departments, from our counselors and our psychologists to our e-learning team, to our curriculum development team, to try to create this breadth of subject material around, physical well-being, mental well-being, which is obviously, as you were saying in the introduction, as a pretty stupid cyclist, I spend a lot of time on the bike working on my physical and mental well-being. So it was something that was very close to my heart. And then I had a lot of practice in, but trying to translate that into, obviously my students aren't going to go out for an 8-hour bike ride to help clear their head. So trying to take what I do in practice along with what I do as an academic, plus what I think was sort of important and passionate about, and asking for help from a wealth of people to develop this app. But after the pilot project, we had the same feedback that I guess Sean had, which was they really wanted student-to-student contact as much as they could. So we had a bench of students acting as student-to-student peer mentors, as well as on sort of layering on top of the app. So we went to them and went, would you mind shooting some videos for us if we sort of set up some environments? And that also led to that very student focus. They shot the videos. I edited them because we don't have a department that does editing, and that's sort of what I do as an academic. So edited all the videos, threw them all up in the system. And then the next iteration that we had, once we presented the idea to the senior leadership team, our CEO went, why don't we run this across the entire campus? Like, this is a fantastic initiative and more students need to get this, sort of positive mindfulness, mental health, well-being, physical well-being, connectedness, all of those sort of topics. We need to roll that out across the college. So it ended up going from just the small pilot to running across all first-year students at the college, which was a pretty big project to manage. And now they're taking it forward and they're sort of adapting it as it goes forward. So that's kind of my story of how I got involved in that. Yeah.
Interesting. And I think that's, I love, Tiff, some of the things, you talked about the mental and the physical well-being, and that, as you said, you had your own examples and cases and so on, which is critically important. But also, I think the fact that you made the same one as Sean and the same as myself as an educator, it has been some time. You may be a little less than us, Tiff, but it has been some time since we were at university. And I think that comes through time and time again whenever we talk about Quitch, whether it's about academic content as well, about the actual input of students. And that's why I love the way that you both have gotten students involved in the project, because I think there's nothing like that. And I think, Sean, the fact that you said that, you started off with some modules, and Tiff, I think you were the same, and you reiterated over time and what are, some of the things, because none of us are going to get this, 100% right, the first time round. But if we keep working on it, I think we can help each other. I think this is one of the things I love that, excuse me, I've got some dogs in the background getting excited. So one of the things, I think when I met both of you, you were both very interested in getting whatever you could for, together for student wellbeing. And I introduced you to one another, and I think you bounced some ideas off one another as well, which was great. And so on that note, I'll ask you first, Tiff, what about, so what advice, based on your experiences to date and that of your students, what advice would you give to other institutions or other educators about where we all find ourselves now, where we're trying to, balance those two worlds of students who are still overseas, and many of them, or simply domestic students who still, can't come on campus? What would be some of your advice to, say, people, other educators who are in the audience today, and other institutions as well? Have you got any words of wisdom for us?
You mean specifically around the student engagement app?
Yes, exactly. And that and the well-being, Tiff, in particular, and how we can execute that.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. And I know one of the interesting things, and this is probably not something that we had thought about beforehand, but one of the team members that we had also spoke fairly good Mandarin as a second language. And one of the things that we didn't realize before we ran the first iteration is if you put anything that says mental health or mental well-being, they actually see that as a real negative. So they see it as mental, like a negative mental thing, and they just completely shut off. So instead of calling it mental health and well-being, which is what we would call it here, it's, it's got certain sort of associations with it. We had to just take that all out and do a lot of just generic well-being. So I think one of the things, and it's funny because I teach in marketing all the time about when you translate things into different languages, make sure it doesn't have negative connotations, and yet did the exact same mistake the first time I ran the app. So doing things like checking who your audience is, and is the language that we're used to using, is it being reciprocated the same way from the students? So that would be a big one that we noticed, that actually we had a lot of students get really turned off by using the app as soon as it got from resilience to mental health. They all went, I don't have any mental health problems. I'm fine. I'm not mental. I'm like, no, it's not. And then by then it was like, they're out the door.
That's a really interesting point, because we often do. That's what we do. We talk about mental well-being. So you convert to then Tiff to like student well-being, because as you said, it was around the focus was on not just emotional well-being, but also physical well-being. And I think in your content, you talked about eating habits, you talked about exercise, all of that.
Yeah, so we had a resilience module, a generic well-being module that had a lot of like mindfulness activities in it and connectedness. And then we had one that was around physical health. And even though it's been some time since I was an undergrad student, I'm pretty sure that habits of undergrad students don't change, which is we don't eat well, we don't sleep well, we don't drink a lot of water, we drink a lot of booze, and we live off booze and caffeine and ramen noodles. Yeah. So doing things in that physical space, going, especially in lockdown, which I even recognized it myself, and I don't know if you guys found the same thing, which was it was really easy to spend the whole day inside on a screen, and then spend the afternoon on a screen, and then the evening on a screen, and not actually step outside the house. So doing little things like that, which was reminding them, get outside, open a window, go have a glass of water, like these little sort of habits to try to get into. But moving really away from not the concepts of mental health and well-being, but the language around it. We really had to reframe that language.
Yeah, really interesting. And thank you for that, Tiff. Sean, I'd ask you that same question then. What would your advice be on the experiences that you've had and working with the students as partners? What advice would you give to other, say, educators or indeed institutions looking to connect with their students better and offering them a good experience?
I totally agree with Tiffany. It's the language around mental health. Well, even the word well-being is seen as, you are avoiding a problem rather than a resource. And my approach, right back to my health promotion days, is seeing, it's all about health as a resource. Well, it's all about well-being as a resource to learn. If things aren't going well for you, how can you possibly get the most out of yourself to learn and grow? So it is like Tiffany is trying to do. It's about perceptions that you're trying to shape around these topics and the value that's there for them. So we are avoiding terms like mental health and those sorts of terms too, because they give the wrong messages to students, and they don't see what they're doing as a resource for their own benefit and development. So, and I think it's not just with students, it's a social and institutional challenge as well to change that perception. Everyone thinks of mental health as, we're doing something about stress or anxiety or depression. Very few people, their default is to think of it as, developing my interest in something, discovering meaningfulness in what I'm doing, flourishing, connecting with the community that I'm in. That's not the default thoughts that come towards to people. To me, that's a challenge, and that's the advice that I would give other institutions, is shape it in that way. Present your wellbeing programs as this will help you be a better student. This will help you learn. This will help you get more out of it, and it will help you get that job at the end of it as well.
Very interesting. And I think that's something we probably, as institutions and as educators, I don't think we've given enough thought to. I think we get used to using certain phrases and so on, and we haven't, as you said, Tiff, you need to think very clearly about who your audience is and how is it perceived by them and how is it accepted by them. And on that note, because we've only actually got 5 minutes left, that went very quick. What I wanted to ask was, so as an educator, so for example, myself, I'm an accounting academic at Swinburne. And in terms of student well-being and so on, what advice can you give to, say, somebody like me who has no training in, support of students, or no training in psychology and so on? What would you suggest is the best way for me to support students? Is it something like, say, this program that you have developed, Sean and Tiff? So, Sean, I think yours is the course that you've developed. I mean, is that something that I could, for example, offer to my third year students? Or is this something that is predominantly for students as they enter the higher education sector? Or what kind of advice would you give there?
The topics certainly are applicable. The way that we've pitched it, the context in which we deliver the messages is about students that are new to university. So it's that transition. So
right. Okay.
in that
That's
regard,
what you said. Yeah. Okay. So it would be a matter then, if it was something that we wanted to offer across the spectrum, then it's something we would have to kind of build another or phrase it differently, maybe, or.
Well, if I can answer this way, those topics, that awareness of these, well-being or contributions to well-being are applicable to students, are applicable to my team in the workplace, are applicable to me.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
It's so there's no bounds there. It's just knowing that taking the attitude that they are resources, and like anything, your resources can be depleted when you have lockdown and so forth, and you've got to be mindful of doing things like self-care, getting outside, as Tiffany suggested, making sure that you spend time away from a screen if that's your interaction with throughout the day. So it's awareness, and I guess through the programs, that's our first step, is creating the awareness. Hopefully that leads to behaviour change.
And can I ask you both as well then, in terms of Quitch, so you decided to use Quitch as the platform to reach the students with this in these particular modules. What was the kind of value proposition, or what was it you saw in Quitch that you thought would make this connection well, or would work well with the students? Tiff, I might jump to you on that one first and then come back to Sean.
For me, it was a familiarity, to be honest. It was because I'd used it before. I'd used it as an academic, so I already knew what the program could do, how to use it. So in terms of the speed that we were operating this project at, it was more I know this works, this is what's going to happen, and I know I can make it work with that. I've been a fan for years. We've been using this project. You and I have been quitching for a long time together. But what I really like now, and I think that's why I've sort of handed off to Monash College and their departments now to sort of run with it, is it's not complex to learn or to use. Once you've got the hang of it, it does, you can make it run itself. You can set it up ahead of time. It's got those nice little reminders. It's got the Bing that comes up on my phone. It's really simple to use. I was testing the app. I had my daughter at home, obviously, because everyone was at home. But I had my teenager at home, and I was having her test the app herself to see if the stuff that I was developing was resonating with her as well. So not just as an academic is it easy to use, but I was going to say a 14-year-old can pick it up. My 14-year-old could probably reprogram my computer. So let's be honest about that. But she thought it was really great. She thought it was really easy to use. And I think the number one thing for me with why I would use Quitch over a lot of other programs is it hits the students with where they're at. They're already on their phones all the time. So let's just hit them with the phone. And the other thing is, because now a lot of classes are on Zoom, we're on our laptops for school, we're on our laptops to communicate. I turn to my phone to get off of this screen. So then having that other resource while they're on their phone and it bings them when they're kind of on their not academic side, it kind of creates that sort of difference between working and learning.
Interesting. Right. Interesting. Thank you, Tiff, for that. Sean, what about yourself?
I find it a little bit amusing that our phones become the respite from being on screen all the time. But it has, it's very true. A little bit different to Tiffany, but there's some similarities there in why we chose it, and it's predominantly because it's an app on their phone. And we were looking at the transition of students and trying to convey ideas to them and get them to start to think about things as early as possible, so that it wasn't getting into first week and then thinking, time management, should I do so, or whatever it might be, or their club, should I join? They're thinking about that, and by the time they get to, we have a major program 2 weeks out from the start and then orientation. So by the time they get into and come into some of those programs, they've already been introduced to some of these concepts that might be challenges for them in their first semester. And so the mobile app was the way to go. That they're still on holidays, they might be doing that part-time job. So this is a way, to reach them and get those ideas in a fun and engaging way. The students are telling us that it's great fun to be on. It's not a hassle. It's not like learning,
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. Yeah, I've had that before. Someone said that they feel like they're learning despite the fact that it's just such a fun and engaging experience. It doesn't feel like a chore, they said. So interesting that you're getting that kind of feedback. So Sean and Tiff, can I say a massive thank you for joining us today? I've loved to hear your insights, because I had started, I knew you were both working on the projects, but I hadn't really had an opportunity to talk to you about how effective it was. And I love the fact that you're iterating as you go. And as you said, Tiff, we're not going to get it right first time round. And Sean, you said you created all of these modules based on the feedback and so on. So thank you both very much. We look forward. We might do another one of these later in the year when you can give us some further feedback on what's actually happening with the students over the course of this year. Now that we're all getting to this is becoming a bit of more of a known world to us, and to see, what we can learn from it. And it'll be interesting to see, what the students, Sean, you talked about the students as well, getting their feedback and then doing some surveys and follow up with them later. So it'll be really interesting to see from that perspective as well, what they've got to say and what we can do. It's always great to hear from them what they think we can do to help them out, because it's always great to know from an educator's perspective. Like I myself, I'm not running any of these programs, but I do have students that I teach, and I want to make sure that I'm looking out for them as best I can as well. So wherever we can join together and help one another out on that area, I think we should. Yeah. So thank you both very, very much for joining us. To the attendees as well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we also, so we have a few messages there. Great. And we're very glad that you enjoyed the experience. And I'm sure Sean and Tiff will be happy to answer any questions. Is that okay, Sean and Tiff, if anyone contacts you outside of here as well? And perhaps, no problem. Because it's just such valuable insight to be able to offer to educators and institutions. So thank you so much for joining us. Do either of you have a couple of last words you'd like to share?
Get outside.
Yes, Tiff, I like it.
Get outside. It's fantastic out. Yeah.
I should get outside too. I'm really looking wrapped and over the moon for those involved and the students that have really enabled this to happen. And so I'm really keen to see how those students go over the semester, and sometimes little things can have a big impact. So I'm hoping we find that.
Yeah, fantastic. Congratulations to you both actually on your initiatives. It's just, absolutely fantastic to have that student wellbeing front of mind. So important. And thank you for joining us. Take care, everybody, now.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye now. Bye-bye.